In the glittering chaos of my wedding reception, surrounded by 150 guests frozen in shock, my father's hand snatched the faded passbook from my trembling fingers. With a sneer that chilled the air, he hurled it across the marble floor, thudding like a heartbeat stopping. "Trash for trash," he spat, his voice echoing through the silence. But as tears blurred my vision, I had no idea that this battered book held the key to unraveling decades of lies, hidden fortunes, and a mother's unbreakable resolve. What secrets had been buried in my family's opulent facade, waiting to explode? My name is Melissa, and that moment at my wedding 3 weeks ago still haunts my every waking thought. The grand ballroom of the five-star hotel in Beverly Hills shimmered under crystal chandeliers, casting fractured light on the faces of our guests. Friends, family, and business associates my father had invited more for show than sentiment. The air was thick with the scent of fresh orchids and expensive perfumes, but beneath it all lurked a tension I couldn't quite name. As I stood there in my ivory gown, clutching Alex's hand, I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. Why had my father, Henry, the man who'd always measured love in dollars and disdain, suddenly transformed into the generous patriarch footing the bill for this lavish affair? And why did my mother, Lily, linger in the shadows, her eyes glistening with unspoken sorrow? Let me take you back to where it all began, to the roots of this tangled family web that would soon ensnare us all. I was raised in a sprawling mansion perched on the hills of Beverly Hills, where marble floors stretched endlessly and every room screamed opulence. My father, Henry, was the king of his real estate empire, a titan who brokered multi-million-dollar deals with a flick of his Rolex-adorned wrist. Flashy sports cars lined our driveway, and his conversations revolved around stock portfolios and power lunches. To him, success was a currency, and anyone who didn't accumulate it was beneath notice. That included me. As a kindergarten teacher, I spent my days shaping young minds with crayons and storybooks, finding joy in their innocent laughter. But to Henry, it was a joke. "You're squandering your life, Melissa," he'd growl over dinner, his fork stabbing at his steak like it had offended him. "With my connections, you could be climbing corporate ladders, not babysitting brats." Each word chipped away at my confidence, leaving me wondering if I was truly the disappointment he painted me to be. My mother, Lily, was his polar opposite, a soft-spoken woman with a heart as vast as the ocean. She worked part-time at a local charity, organizing drives for the homeless and tutoring underprivileged kids. Her days were filled with quiet acts of kindness, but Henry dismissed them with a scoff. "What a pointless endeavor," he'd sneer, lounging in his leather armchair. "Feeding strays won't fill our coffers." I used to pity her, thinking she was too timid to fight back. She'd just offer a gentle smile, her eyes distant, and retreat to her corner of the house like a ghost in her own home. Why didn't she stand up to him? Why endure his barbs year after year? Little did I know, her silence was a shield, hiding a strength forged in secrecy. Everything shifted when I met Alex. It was during a chaotic school field trip to a gleaming new community center his architecture firm was designing. Rushing after a wayward student, I collided straight into him, books flying, my balance teetering. His strong arms caught me just in time, and when our eyes met, his warm smile melted the stress away. "Whoa there, are you okay?" he asked, his voice steady and kind. No judgment, no expectations, just genuine concern. We talked for hours that day, and soon, dates followed. For 2 blissful years, Alex saw me, the real me, not the heiress to a fortune I never wanted. He celebrated my passion for teaching, listening intently as I shared stories of my students' breakthroughs. His parents, Robert and Grace, were equally grounding. Over family dinners, they'd ask about my classroom antics, not my father's latest acquisition. It was refreshing, a balm to the wounds Henry had inflicted. But when word reached my father about Alex's lineage, his family was a pillar in the business world, with Robert heading a prestigious firm. Henry's demeanor flipped like a switch. Suddenly, he was calling me, his voice laced with feigned warmth. "How's that young man of yours?" he'd inquire. But the questions always veered to Robert's ventures, not my happiness. 3 days after an awkward introductory dinner, Henry declared, "I'll cover the wedding entirely. The venue, the catering, the works. My gift to you both." His eyes gleamed with calculation, and a flicker of doubt stirred in me. Henry, the man who'd pinched pennies on my birthdays, now splashing out? I pushed the suspicion aside, desperate to believe in redemption. Maybe he was finally seeing me. As preparations hummed along, one starry evening in our manicured garden, my mother approached me. The fountain bubbled softly nearby, masking our whispers. She pressed a small wrapped item into my palm, her fingers cold and trembling. "I have something for you too, dear," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I'll present it on your wedding day. It's the most precious thing I own. Promise me, no matter what anyone says, you'll cherish it." Her eyes held a depth I'd never noticed, a mix of resolve and fear. Confused, I nodded, tucking the encounter away. What could it be? A family heirloom? But the wedding whirlwind swept me up, and I forgot to probe further. On the morning of the big day, a strange unease gnawed at me as I slipped into my dress. Memories flooded back unbidden, a day when I was 13, sent home from school with a fever. Wandering the quiet halls, I heard odd rustling from my parents' bedroom. Peeking through the cracked door, I saw Lily perched on the edge of the bed, meticulously counting a modest stack of bills. A worn notebook lay open beside her, filled with neat tallies. Her face was focused, almost serene. When she spotted me, panic flashed across her features. She slammed the notebook shut, shoving the money into a drawer. "Oh, sweetie, it's just grown-up stuff," she said hastily, forcing a smile. "Nothing to worry about." I never mentioned it again, but now, as maids fussed over my veil, that scene replayed in my mind. What had she been hiding? The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but I shook it off. Today was about joy, not shadows. The ceremony unfolded in splendor. The hotel's ballroom transformed into a fairy tale with cascading flowers and golden accents. Vows exchanged with Alex felt pure, his hand steady in mine, promising a future free from my father's toxicity. Yet, glancing at the crowd, my heart sank. Henry wasn't watching us. He was deep in conversation with Robert, gesturing animatedly about some deal. And Lily? She sat rigidly in the front row, her chosen dress overridden by Henry's pick, a stiff, unflattering gown that made her look diminished. Her eyes were rimmed red, her lips pressed into a thin line as if holding back a storm. The reception hall buzzed with forced laughter and clinking champagne flutes, but the undercurrent of unease only grew stronger. Henry, already several glasses deep, held court at the center table, his booming voice carrying over the string quartet. He boasted about his latest condo development, inflating figures and dropping names like confetti. Robert and Grace listened politely, but I caught their subtle exchange. A raised eyebrow, a knowing tilt of the head. They saw through him, just as I always had. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The family toasts and gifts. Henry stood first, swaying slightly, a triumphant grin splitting his face. He raised a crystal envelope like a trophy. "To my daughter and her fine new husband," he announced, voice thick with liquor and self-satisfaction. "A little something to start your life together." He handed me the envelope with exaggerated ceremony. Inside was a check for $100,000. Gasps rippled through the room. He turned to Robert, eyes gleaming. Nothing but the best for family, right, Robert? We businessmen understand value. Robert smiled graciously, then stood. Alex, Melissa, we wanted to give you something meaningful. He placed a small velvet box in Alex's palm. Inside were keys to a stunning beachfront house in Malibu, complete with ocean views and a private deck. A place to build memories, Robert said simply. The crowd murmured in admiration. Henry's smile faltered for a split second before he forced it back, wider, faker. My mother's turn came next. She rose slowly, clutching a small, weathered leather passbook, the kind banks issued decades ago, its edges frayed and cover faded to a dull gray. The room quieted as she approached the head table. Her hands shook as she placed it in my palms. Melissa, she whispered, voice cracking just enough for me to hear. This is my gift to you. Everything I've saved. I want you to have the freedom I never did. Her eyes locked on mine, pleading, fierce, loving. I felt tears prick my own eyes. It was such a humble offering compared to the flash around us, yet it carried a weight I couldn't yet name. Before I could even thank her, Henry lurched forward. What the hell is this? He bellowed, snatching the passbook from my hands. He flipped it open, scanned the pages, then barked a harsh laugh. A savings book? After 30 years of marriage, this pathetic little thing is all you've got? His face twisted with contempt. In one vicious motion, he hurled it to the floor. It skidded across the polished marble with a sickening slap, pages splaying open. Trash for trash, he snarled, loud enough for every guest to hear. Silence crashed over the room like a wave. Forks hovered midair. Champagne bubbles popped unnoticed. My mother's face crumpled. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks. But she didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, exposed, broken in front of everyone. Rage boiled inside me, hot, sharp, unfamiliar. Alex stepped forward, fists clenched, but I grabbed his arm. Don't, I hissed. That's exactly what he wants, a scene to twist. My voice trembled, but I forced calm into it. I bent down slowly, deliberately, every eye on me. My fingers closed around the passbook. The leather felt warm, almost alive, as if it carried years of hidden heartbeat. I straightened, met my mother's gaze, and said clearly, "Thank you, Mom. This means more than you'll ever know." Then I turned to Alex. "We're leaving." Henry's face purpled. "Melissa, sit down. This is your wedding." But I was already moving, Alex at my side, his hand firm on my lower back. Guests parted like water as we walked out. Behind us, Henry's voice rose in furious protest, but the doors closed, muffling his rage. We drove in silence to the beach house Robert and Grace had gifted us. Moonlight silvered the waves crashing against the shore. Inside, the air smelled of salt and fresh paint. I collapsed onto the couch, still in my wedding dress, the passbook clutched to my chest. Alex sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" he asked softly. I shook my head. I don't know what that was. But Mom? She looked so small. And Dad? He's never going to change. My mind raced back to her words. Freedom I never had. The old memory resurfaced. 13-year-old me watching her count bills in secret, the notebook vanishing like a guilty secret. What if there was more? What if the passbook wasn't just sentimental? Sleep evaded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the passbook hitting the floor, heard my father's sneer. By dawn, resolve hardened inside me. I needed answers. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Go to the bank on Wilshire. Ask for Mr. Thompson. Bring the passbook. Tell no one else." Alex drove us there without question. The bank lobby was cool and hushed, all marble and hushed voices. When I handed the passbook to the teller, her polite smile froze. Her eyes widened. "One moment, please," she said, voice hushed. She disappeared, returning with a sharply dressed man in his 50s, Mr. Thompson, branch manager. He ushered us into a private office, closing the door with a soft click. "Ms. Melissa," he began, sitting across from us. "This passbook, it's tied to a trust account your mother established 25 years ago." He opened a file, sliding it toward me. Numbers stared back. Deposits, interest, growth. The current balance, $2,500,000. My breath caught. Alex's hand tightened on mine. "How?" I whispered. Mr. Thompson leaned forward. "Your mother received an inheritance from her grandmother shortly after your birth. She never told your father. She opened the account in her maiden name, made small, consistent deposits from her charity salary and other quiet sources. She was meticulous. The trust is solely in your name now, with instructions to release upon your marriage. She wanted you protected." Protected. The word echoed. All those years I'd pitied her weakness, judged her silence. She'd been building an escape. For me, for herself. A fortress of patience and sacrifice, hidden in plain sight. Tears blurred the numbers on the page. I thought of her standing there last night, tears falling while Henry humiliated her. She'd endured decades of his control, legally separated for 20 years but living under the same roof to keep my childhood stable. Waiting. Always waiting. I called her from the parking lot, voice breaking. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" Her reply was soft, steady. "I didn't want you carrying that weight as a child. I wanted you to grow up believing home was safe, even if it wasn't perfect. Now you're free. And soon. So will I." 1 week later, she told Henry she was leaving, filed for divorce. When he laughed, thinking she had nothing, she calmly listed her assets, the trust she'd nurtured alone. His empire began to crack that very day. Whispers spread through his circles. The scene at the wedding, the public humiliation of his wife and daughter. Deals stalled. Partners withdrew. He tried calling me, demanding I talk sense into her, threatening to disown me. I blocked his number. My mother moved quickly after that confrontation. Within days, she packed only what she truly wanted. Her favorite books, a few soft sweaters, the small collection of pressed flowers she'd kept since her own childhood. No jewelry Henry had bought to flaunt status, no designer bags. Just the quiet essentials of a life she'd lived mostly in silence. She found a cozy one-bedroom apartment a short walk from the charity center where she'd volunteered for so long. The building was modest, painted soft sage green, with a tiny balcony overlooking a community garden. She told me later how the first night there felt like breathing for the first time in decades. She painted the walls the pale lavender she'd always loved, but Henry had called childish. She hung simple curtains that let in morning light. She bought a small writing desk and began pouring her story onto pages. Raw, honest reflections about endurance, about choosing invisibility as a form of protection, about the slow burn of hope. Her memoir, when it was eventually published, didn't seek revenge. It didn't name Henry directly. Instead, it spoke to countless women who'd learned to shrink themselves to keep peace. It became a quiet phenomenon, shared in book clubs, discussed in support groups, quoted on social media by strangers who'd felt seen for the first time. "Strength isn't always loud," one reviewer wrote. "Sometimes it's the sound of a door closing softly behind you." I chose to keep teaching. The kindergarten classroom remained my sanctuary. Finger paints on tiny hands, gap-toothed smiles when a child finally sounded out their name. The trust fund money didn't change that. Instead, I used a portion to establish a scholarship in my mother's name. Full tuition support for underprivileged children whose families struggled with the same invisibility she'd known. Each year when we awarded the first grants, Mom would attend quietly, sitting in the back row with tears she no longer hid. Alex's firm flourished too. Inspired by the community center where we first met, he took on more pro bono projects, designing affordable housing, revitalizing public spaces in underserved neighborhoods. Robert and Grace became like second parents, hosting Sunday barbecues where laughter filled the air instead of tension. 3 years slipped by like gentle waves on that Malibu shore. Our daughter Emma arrived on a rainy spring morning. She has my mother's eyes, deep, knowing, kind, and Alex's easy smile. When she was old enough to toddle across the living room, she reached up toward the framed passbook hanging above the fireplace. The leather had darkened with age, the edges still frayed, but now protected behind glass. Emma pointed at it, babbling, "Book, book," as if she understood its weight. I lifted her so she could see it better. "That's Grandma's gift," I told her softly. "It taught us what love really looks like." Henry still tries sometimes. A call every few months, a text that begins with, "I miss my granddaughter," before sliding into old patterns, subtle guilt, veiled demands. I let them go to voicemail. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a switch you flip. It's a slow walk, one where you can love someone from afar while keeping your own heart safe. I don't hate him. I simply no longer allow his shadow to dim our light. Looking back, that wedding wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the moment the mask finally cracked. The passbook wasn't about the $2.5 million. It was proof that real power grows in silence, in patience, in choices made when no one is watching. My mother didn't fight with words or fists. She fought with time, with discipline, with love so deep it waited decades to bloom. And in the end, she won. Not by destroying him, but by freeing herself. By giving me the tools to do the same. Sometimes, late at night when Emma is asleep and Alex is sketching at the table, I stand before that framed passbook and trace its outline with my finger. I think of the woman who counted bills in secret, who smiled through decades of belittling, who threw herself on the mercy of patience so her daughter could one day stand tall. "Thank you, Mom," I whisper to the quiet room, "for the freedom, for the truth, for showing me that the strongest love is often the quietest, and for proving that those who try to make you feel small only hold power if you let them."